Welcome to the Defenders of Business Value, the podcast that helps business owners unlock the value they've built and exit on their terms. I'm your host, Ed Meisegland, and for the last 30 years, I've been helping business owners prepare, grow, protect, and ultimately sell their businesses. Whether you're a business owner, a buyer, or an advisor guiding others through the process, if you want to make your last deal your best one, you are in the right place. So let's get started. So welcome back to the Defenders of Business Value podcast. Today, we're taking a step off the beaten path. Most of the time, the conversations about acquisitions, valuation, and exits, it's about the metro areas, big cities, private equity, large deal flow, things like that. Too often, we don't talk about what happens in the small towns, right? And the rural corners, especially, and I'm talking about here in Indiana, where businesses have been around for perhaps generations. And that's what we're focusing on today. So Spark Capital. I had the opportunity to speak at an event with Joe Rust, one of the founders, and their whole premise is to find, buy, grow strong companies in places that normal buyers don't look, and that's in the rural communities. And their mission is to keep those businesses thriving where they're at, especially when there is no clear way for those business owners to exit. And so today, Dane Chapman and Joe Rust and we talk about that. What does value look like in rural communities? We talk about deal sourcing, valuation, succession, who and why would sell to somebody like them. And when you hear this, their mission is just different. They're coming in and looking at these rural communities. They're looking at finding local investors, seeing if there's local opportunities for investment from private as well as public, right? There's community foundations that should be coming alongside these businesses to help organizations and groups like them come in and preserve what these companies have started. So you guys will certainly enjoy this conversation I had with the guys from Spark Capital because they're different. Enjoy the show. Joe and Dane, welcome to this show.
Thanks so much for having us. We're excited to be here.
I've been looking forward to this because the funny thing with you guys is that you don't do it the same way everybody else does. Start with Spark Capital. What led you to this buy box of rural community acquisitions?
It's really an amazing time for this model and for ETA. It's an exciting time, but it's also needed. Like we are in a time where we need people to step up, investors, operators, and sellers to realize, this is a time for these type of transactions to happen. And that's kind of our stories. Dane and I just connected at the right time and identifying, this need. And Dane and I both worked in a startup together, Egg Life Foods. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun growing a CPG company from just a handful of employees to over 100 plus, to a few hundred doors in Chicago to 10,000 plus retail doors in the country. So we loved working together on the sales and sales operations team. And when we had the chance to work together again, we were both pretty excited, especially with this approach of buying businesses in small towns, as Dan and I are both from rural Indiana. So we both took our own paths, and I'll let Dane share, a little bit on what he did after Egg Life, but I started to do some work in rural development in my home county. And the business leaders there were like, we want to look at doing economic development with a focus on entrepreneurship rather than industrial development. And so they hired me to kind of develop an entrepreneurial program. And one of the things that we did was launch a venture fund to support entrepreneurs. And we did it almost overnight. Our goal was to raise $100,000. We raised $305,000 to support venture-backable businesses. And then we looked around and we're like, oh, wait, they're not here. We're in a small town, rural setting. But we did find is that there's a lot of these legacy businesses that have been around for decades. And that's where we actually need to be focusing on today. And we support venture-backable businesses in the rural setting. But this is where the opportunities started to arise. And I started to talk to Dane about this. And Dane, why don't you share where you were at when I called?
Sure. So Joe and I worked together and we absolutely loved it. I was off at business school in Boston and I was talking with Joe, it would have been maybe over fall break or something along those lines, and told him about entrepreneurship through acquisition. And he said, I'm working on something similar with these small venture companies, but maybe it could be bigger. And so over winter break, I flew back to Indiana and we spent maybe 6 hours just brainstorming what this could look like. And That's really where Spark Capital was formed. So we took this small idea of thinking about these legacy backbone businesses, which are all over the state of Indiana and all over the Midwest. And we said, how about we try to raise a fund that focuses on rural and rural mixed businesses to be able to really give back and invest in these communities where Joe and I are from. We hold the values of these communities very close to our heart, and we think they're really, really good businesses. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the benefits of investing in rural America. But we thought, just on the premise of this idea of acquiring these legacy businesses in rural America, there's something there. And so we're on the path of raising a committed capital fund to be able to do that, acquire businesses and back searchers. And it's been a lot of fun over the last year working together with Joe, and we're really excited about what we're building here at Spark Capital.
What are your hometowns?
I'm from Brookston, Indiana, so just north of Purdue. Joe and I also both went to Purdue, majored in ag business. And my town is at roughly 1,500 people, quite rural.
How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I'm from Seymour, Indiana, hometown of John Mellencamp. He sings about small towns.
Did you know, and this is according to PitchBook, that 82% of private equity deals occur in metro areas? That's a big number if you think about it. Then IBIS, right? Rural business closure rates are higher than sales, right? Many owners just call it a day and close the business. And then, to me, this one was probably the most fascinating stat, was that a $3 million EBITDA manufacturing company in rural Indiana that sat for 18 months with no offers, they relocated the headquarter engagement or the listing to Chicago, and it sold in 4 months. And I guess that's kind of where I want to keep going with you guys. It's like the perception is it's underserved, but yet to me, there's also an opportunity, right? You're bringing liquidity to an environment that really, really is illiquid. You know what I mean?
You've really hit on why this is so important, especially to Dane and I, because with this wave of aging business owners that, need to transition their business to a new owner in the next 5 to 10 years, the worst thing that can happen to small towns across this country is that these businesses shut down. That's the worst thing. Now, the second worst thing is what you just talked about, is that the business transition out of state to another larger private equity firm in a large city. So that's really sad story, what you just said about Ohio. That town lost the business, employees, and the state of Ohio lost taxable income. And so everyone lost in that case except the big private equity firm in Chicago. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to create, really, in some ways, a marketplace to really help facilitate these deals. And Dane and I don't want to do 1 or 2 deals. We want to help create and bring people to the table to have dozens of transactions.
So how does that happen, right? Having been in this space for as long as I have, I can tell you that it's a different conversation, right? And I'm hoping that you can shed some light. Is it education? What prevents the legacy business owner in rural Indiana from understanding the mechanics of business exits, right? Because I'm assuming, and I think my premise is wrong, that everyone's blanketing them, from brokers to searchers to ETA folks, that, I want to buy your business, right? And so I'm curious from an awareness standpoint of how the mechanics of this thing works. And I know I'm rambling here, but this other thing I wanted to bring up has to do with the advisors, right? The same advisors are concentrated in the urban areas and not the rural community. So the exit advisors, the brokerages, the M&A attorneys, those folks, value growth folks, they're not hanging out in the rural communities. And so I'm looking for your commentary on that,
Sure. We can attack it in 2 ways. There are 2 questions there. I think the first one, you're absolutely right. It is education. It's also, these business owners, they're operating a business. They're not in the business to sell. And this is often their first time that they're ever selling a business. And so going through that process is a whole different motion, a whole different muscle that they have to learn, and they have to prepare their business for that sale. And not to mention, it is a very emotional process for them, because this is something that they've likely built years and years and spent so much time and money building this business, and have developed friendships in the communities and with their employees. So that part of education, I think, also pairs nicely with trust. I mean, they have to trust us. And I think one thing that has worked really well for us is going into the local communities and working with chamber partners or working with other, call them, leaders in the community that, refer us to them. And I think that's been one way that we've really been able to help get over that trust gap and be able to have these conversations with potential sellers and start to walk them through the process of what that's going to look like in terms of them selling their business. So I think it's twofold. There's the education piece, but also the trust piece.
I think it's about like aligning incentives. And for us in that trust piece, aligning incentives to focus on relationship. If the investor or the buyer of the business is local, you're more likely to care about the employees, the company, and that community. And so we're trying to focus on the relationships of this transaction.
And the funny thing is that your reputations are way out in front of you, right? That your posture toward these types of business owners, you're leading with that, and people can vet that, right? You're clearly looking to do a deal. I want to buy your business. I know you're saying I want to preserve your legacy. I know you want to keep my employees. I know all those things. How do I know that? I mean, you're saying it, but if I'm a business owner in the rural community and someone like you guys show up at my doorstep, how do I know you're just not full of crap?
Well, we don't want it to be always Joe Rust and Dane Chapman. It is about, like I was saying, relationships. And so we are trying to leverage local investors and chamber leaders to be there with us. So it's not just about us.
Yeah, talk more about that. I mean, so mechanically, how does that look? Like, say you're targeting Seymour, right? You hit that county and say, look, Spark Capital's coming. Who wants to hop on the bandwagon with us? Is that how you're doing it or no?
Well, I wish it was that easy.
Don't we all?
I wish we could just, shoot up a flare and everyone would show up. The reality is you probably know more than us, Ed, that sellers are very cautious and discreet when it comes to selling their business. And so they're not going to show up to a public meeting, but they will take advice from their accountant, their lawyer, or maybe they might talk about it at a chamber meeting, we're hoping too. So we're trying to leverage the mechanics through the chamber, which our theory is that most of these aging business owners are chamber members, and that we start to build awareness through service providers that are also members of these chambers. Part of the mechanics that we do is, we get a list of small businesses within our target range, and we sit down and start asking people about these businesses and say, hey, has someone talked to this business owner yet about, what's their succession plan? And as soon as we hear things like, oh, they have a son that's already preparing to take over, we're like, that's great. Let them continue down that path, because that is more of an ideal scenario. What we've even found a few times too is that, they actually, this person just bought this business 3 years ago. So we're starting to see that transactions are happening as well, but it really sits down to doing a little bit manual work with the relationships in these towns.
And I think the only thing I would layer onto that, Ed, is as we start to do this and continue to do this, we certainly hope that our actions will speak louder than our words, and will be able to help us as we continue to navigate and continue to acquire businesses.
Well, like I said, I mean, you guys lead with it. It's fairly easy to vet you guys out. I mean, every event I go to, someone's bringing what you guys are doing up. So I think that's the easy part. I wanted to talk about some of these companies, right? The logical buyer is already in the business, right? It's number 2 or perhaps 3, maybe even 4. And everybody in the community knows them, right? Back in my day, it was a concrete construction company. Dale and Brad Lambert owned it, but everybody knew Charlie and Lenny in the community. So if they ever acquired it, it would be business as usual, right? So I'm curious to know, as you guys are looking at these businesses, because clearly you're not going to come in and be operators, right? Or are you?
No, our plan is to have operators to come in, and of course, we would roll up our sleeves if we ever need to.
But are you looking for that bench depth that can come on to the cap table that, hey, you know what? We've got big plans and you happen to be a big part of it. Because I believe legacy owners look out and see who has helped them accumulate their wealth. And I think that's why you see so many people trying to figure out whether an ESOP's the right way to go. I think it's the same thing, that if my 2 or 3 or 4 can buy this business, that's my person. So Is that in the cards for you guys? And if not, that's fine. I'm just kind of curious to know how that works for you.
I'd say it's not in our immediate playbook. It's in our exit playbook. The way we've kind of built our model is that we still have to provide a return, for our investors to get this cycle started. That said, if someone comes up to us and they have an opportunity to sell their employee, I think we'd help them consider that as an option, against us, because our outcome, again, is really about preserving these businesses to be locally owned and operated as much as possible. And if that is an outcome that can be great for them, then we will help facilitate that. But if they don't have the capital or the expertise to do it, we want to come in and help grow the business and make sure everyone wins.
That's where I was going, is that the 2, 3, or 4 become part of Spark Capital as the operator for the business, whereas you provide the leadership, the oversight, and the visionary, and they continue to operate. And I have to believe it mitigates the risk for you guys, doesn't it, or no?
Oh, for sure. If there's an operator where we can provide the capital and the strategic insight to grow and scale the business, still to provide a return and kind of start to build really momentum for this business, absolutely, we'll still have that operator involved who's there locally and knows the business. I think that makes sense. Where I was kind of hinting at a while ago, if there's a chance for that operator to kind of grow with the company and then also buy the business back as we've grown the business, we would love to consider that as well, because then that really creates the really long-term permanent outcome of that money really staying locally for long term.
I think the part to that is, as we think about our operators, there's also equity involved for our operators. And so if the operator is already with the business, of course, we want a deep bench in every business that we acquire. I think that knowledge transfer is very, very important. And if we can keep that knowledge within the business so there's less disruption, that's an amazing, amazing thing.
I've been an appraiser guy for a long time, and it wasn't until I met both of you guys, I guess, at the same time, when you were talking about this, and it got me thinking about market multiples, right? Market multiples are driven by demand. And I haven't had a chance to do it, but it's on my list to see how granular I can get on market multiples to figure out, is there really a delta between urban and rural? We addressed it early on about the relocation and how quickly it's sold. I have to believe, as a result of the demand, that the value is suppressed. Yet, I think a lot of people like me that value companies come in there, use the market data, and I don't want to say there's a discount, but I have to believe that part of the challenge is that the data that's being used is, I don't want to say inappropriate, but is not a direct correlation to the rural community. And I think that creates the challenge. And where I'm heading with is I want to know how you guys look at risk and multiples when you're talking to these companies, right? Because again, it's back to, if you're the only game in town, and I'm not saying that this is predatory by any means. I want to make that clear. There's a greater risk that suppresses value when you don't have a ready market, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you guys are viewing the risk and how you guys are structuring to accommodate that?
Yeah, I think with this whole thing, some of the risks we see also as opportunities. And so as we think about the multiples, of course, I think what you're hinting at is oftentimes we're using multiples in these very urban settings to then apply to a rural business. And so it's kind of like using an apple to compare to an orange. And I think there is a little bit of, call it a discount for the businesses that you're purchasing in rural settings, because there might not be as much growth opportunities or be able to grow as quickly. And so we have seen that in terms of our multiples and when we're looking at these businesses. However, we see that there are really sticky customers and also really sticky employees and workers of the business. And I think that is a real strength to these rural businesses that we're acquiring, because we talk about talent all the time. And when we think about talent in these rural settings, there's a real opportunity for us to be able to provide a really good job for employees and for community members. And that's something that's really important to us, is we want to keep these communities very vibrant. And the way to do that is to keep people employed and keep businesses in operation, and also help these businesses grow in rural settings.
There's even, to add to that, for some of these smaller legacy businesses that require like hourly labor, the cost of living in these rural settings allow for a little bit more of affordable labor force that you may not get in an urban setting. So there's a strength there to, leverage that in a small town. And second, this is versus fact, this is more in theory, I think, and a little bit could be proven, is that there is a little bit of a wave of people trying to preserve small towns, like what Dane and I are doing. Towns are working to try to bring talent back in. And we're going to try to ride that wave as well to say, high caliber employees, so more C-suite level employees that say, hey, I want to boomerang back into the town I grew up in. We're going to try to leverage that to help bring talent into these small businesses as well.
When I look at risk, everything you just said screams to me personal goodwill. It's like, oh my gosh. My seller, right, has all the relationships. It has all the employees. It has all the customers. And the good news with you guys is you have the ability to mitigate that, right? You're coming in an entirely different posture. I think for the individual buyer, and as I would be coaching a seller, I think if they want to know how a buyer's going to look at it, it's just that. It's how much personal goodwill is tied up in that business, and how are we going to mitigate it in order for, like in this case, the concrete company I was referring to, it's a fixture in the community. And if Ed would have showed up to buy it, it's like, okay, am I willing to give it a shot? Probably. I mean, I don't want to say it makes me cringe, but I'm sitting here going, if I'm talking to a business owner, Spark Capital shows up, right? And they have to understand that there's some more inherent risk. And to me, that's what's suppressing the value. And I don't even know what you call it, the rural community discount. I don't know what you would call it, but to me, it feels like you have to do that just because you don't know.
It is interesting. And I think Dane can talk more about the economics and the modeling that we do and how we really consider our offers and our LOIs. I will say part of our strategy to mitigate some of that risk as you talk about these fixtures in these communities, but also in the business itself, you talk to other people in this line of work and buying businesses, they'll say, get rid of the owner as quick as possible because they're going to block you from growing the company the way you want to. We don't quite take that approach. We think it's critical for our approach in a small town to keep the business owner involved a little bit longer. Now, we're not saying for years, but we're saying we want them to have skin in the game with, seller financing, which is important for our model, but it's also important for us transitioning the business, but also leveraging what they know about the business. And it is a little bit risky with our approach and scaling, but it actually helps mitigate risk for us.
But does that translate to value to the seller? It mitigates your risk, but does it lead to a premium to the seller? And between you and me, I'm saying no, which I don't think that that's a bad thing. You can't command a premium without demand, right?
Well, you're talking about maybe different types of premium. So we're not talking about financial premium in these small towns because small town business owners, our belief is that they care more about their company than they do about maximizing the sale of their business, which if you have a small business in, we'll just say Fishers, Indiana, they're not going to be probably as connected to the whole community of Fishers because it's just too big. And so they don't care as much. But if we come to a town like Seymour, they're going to give some consideration to who's buying it, how are they transitioning the business, how are they going to operate it, and they want to be involved, and they'll give us indirectly a discount for it.
That is a great counterpoint. You're right. I do agree with you. It's that there is probably a more intangible sale factor than just X's and O's. I get you.
Joe made a great point. So I love the counter there. I think the only thing I would add to that in the wise words of Charlie Munger is invert, always invert. And what are their alternatives? If it's not us or it's not private equity because they're not willing to spend those high multiples or get those high multiples, then maybe it goes back to what we opened up with is they're just going to shut down the business. And that's the last thing that we want for these business owners in the communities. And so inherently, I think to Joe's point, maybe there is a little bit of a discount as you look at it, but really, I think it all washes out. And I think it's a real benefit of what we're doing.
It's really important, and this is probably for anyone looking at buying a business, Ed, and you do this naturally, it's part of your business, is really understanding the clear objectives of the seller, right? Like that is just so important. But I think a lot of people are excited to run into this space and just like, all right, it's all about money. It's not always about money. You got to ask the seller, like, what are your objectives? Is it retirement? Is it cash? Is it legacy? Do you have kids that want to be involved in the business? Like these are important things that you have to know up front before you really put together the offer.
And on top of it, I think there's so many buyers. We've been on stage together and spoke on this same topic, but there's such a massive land grab right now, right? And so I think as accessible to capital as some of these buyers are, I think that's all that they're making it, because there's so much of their risk that they're discounting the needs of the seller. And here we've taken a posture of, look, we're not buyer and seller, we're counterparties, right? And we have an issue. This issue is we need to create liquidity for one party, and we need to make it an income producing asset for the other. So together, what are your needs? And let's figure out how to facilitate that, right? And it's not that I'm trying to get one over on you. We won't BS one another. There's predatory buyers out there, 100%. But, again, back to vetting who you're working with, whether it's who's leading your sale or who's buying your company, you need to do some vetting. So I had Denise Logan on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and she's a therapist, right? A lot of what she's doing is just that, just the intangibles of, number one, this is going to be a loss, right? And I think that you guys addressing some of that, right? What is your legacy? How can we come alongside you and preserve it? We're just the next chapter in this business's journey. How can we come alongside you? I think that messaging will resonate.
Yeah, we'd like to say we're stewards of this business, and we hope that you trust us, and that's a big part of what we're trying to be a part of, for sure.
So now everybody's going to hear this, and they're going to say, you've already given the playbook, so you're going to Chamber of Commerce's to demonstrate credibility. Where else are you sourcing? To me, I'm certain it's all referrals for you guys. First mover's advantage, baby.
Yeah. I mean, it's an easy playbook for people to go approach. And I think as long as people are, doing it in the right way, like we would encourage people to go do that. Dane and I treat this as we don't need to be so competitive or discreet about it, because the opportunity is out there. There's plenty to go around. And I think, if we really are serious about our mission, and we are about preserving the small towns through small businesses, we want to help elevate that game for everyone. And so that's where Dane and I are not just approaching this about like what's good for Spark Capital. That's why we're working with Brian Shutt. We're trying to approach this through a legislative as well. Like there should be tax incentives. There should be investments from the state of Indiana. There should be chambers and other organizations should be pushing succession planning, so that when Dane and I find our way around to these business owners, they're actually prepared to talk about selling their business. We can all win if everyone starts to think about this in a way about the objectives we're trying to accomplish.
I'll tell you what, one of the best things that's happened to Indiana is it truly is Brian Shutt. Not to stroke his ego. To me, he doesn't have one to begin with, but I'll tell you, I do think that he's a big win for Indiana, that he recognizes that this is an issue. And I applaud the two of you. I know that part of it has to do with you bringing that to his attention. And that's why we're excited to come alongside and figure out what we can do to facilitate it. Because again, for us, it's all about awareness, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting how, Dan and I started building this, and we're still in the build mode. We are fundraising, we're raising committed capital, we're looking for interested operators, building a roster there. And our third pipeline is the one that has the highest barrier, and that is the sellers. So the more awareness we can drive for sellers to think about preparing to sell their business, that's the biggest barrier that we're trying to overcome.
It's just really important, to Joe's point about sellers. Like, it's going to be a very long tail if folks aren't prepared when we have these conversations. And so the more that we can get in front of sellers and try to help them and assist them, and of course, you brought this up earlier, we're interested in buying their business. So they're obviously going to come to this with maybe a little bit more of a shield, but through the referrals that we've received and through building this network of trust and just being people of our word and good steward to these businesses, I think it's allowing us to help speed up that process. And it's also allowing them to be better prepared and be able to move through this process much quicker, which is important for them.
We have told people that are looking at preparing to sell, regardless of where they come from, is, your exit window is anywhere from 2 or 3 years, right? It's going to take you 3 to 9 months to kind of get your arms around that I'm going to sell. It's going to take 3 to 9 months to actually execute a deal in our world. And it's going to take at least 3 to 6 to 12 months to transition out. You look at that window and now go backwards, right? To me, that's what you should be looking at. And I wrote on LinkedIn about, these business owners that are hanging in there. To me, that's great. I mean, have at it. Just remember that you continuing to siphon off the business without reinvesting in improvements or technology or whatever. Somebody's going to come in there and there's a cost to that cure, right? And to me, that's part of my messaging, because we see it in the rural communities that, you want a premium, you're going to have a premium company for somebody to buy. It's don't fix it. I mean, we had a manufacturing company that had 30-year-old equipment. It's $600,000 to replace this piece of equipment. Buyers came in and every one of them said, it's going to cost me $600,000 to replace this piece of equipment. And so they discounted accordingly. But back to mechanics of valuation, right? The sellers need to understand how the buyer is looking at those businesses. And that's why I truly appreciate you guys on, you're so forward about, this is how we're looking at your business and this is what we want to do. Can we figure out a way to do it? And I think any buyer that takes that posture will be successful.
You've done tons of deals through your work, obviously. You see, like, through an approach, where do you think some of the gaps are that Dane and I maybe we won't see until later after we line up?
You guys are so novel in how you're approaching it, right? I think it's easy to get behind you. You got the first mover's advantage. I was telling Dane, there's a book called Red Ocean, Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is all blue. There's no sharks that are feeding. So that's the red ocean. So you have basically the run of the table to demonstrate there are buyers out there that are not predatory, that are leading heart first, community first. We want to preserve what you've created, right? So the gaps, to me, it has to do with awareness and vetting. This podcast will make its rounds, right? And people will know Spark Capital, but until you have some reps on the ground and people can say, it wasn't really this easy. Did they really live up to what they said they were going to do? And that's, to me, will be the domino effect, right? As soon as you get that first one and you demonstrate that, our model actually works, and off you go. There's a private equity group and they were mission-based investing, right? They got behind the mission and they were looking at how, the underserved, right? And who's, going into buying companies with the intent for holding them forever, but those that are serving the underprivileged. So anyway, I think it has more to do with mission. So the gaps I see have more to do with not model, but awareness.
We feel that and understand it. It's natural when we're just we're getting started. So,
but again, play it out. I mean, we were on stage at Rally together, right? Lots of people we're talking about that and how you guys operate. Certainly, this podcast will change your life. I think there's so much noise in the buying community that you're demonstrating a signal. You know what I mean?
That's the idea. We want our investors, our sellers, and our operators to all be excited about the work that we're doing together. I think when you align it to a mission that has great outcomes, that's how you get people excited to show up.
I would really be interested to see if these community funds wouldn't come alongside of you, right? And candidly, that was one of the things that I was talking about has to do with funding, right? It's one thing to get SBA money, right? Especially in your space. How does that community, right? Because the community says, look, we're doubling down on Lambert Concrete. We want to preserve the community, and this is how we're doing it. But the state or the federal government, somebody's going to have to come alongside and say, you know what? I see why that makes sense, and come and help in that fashion. You know what I mean?
A local community foundation investing in a business with the reality that they're helping keep that business local, because guess what? That business is also the ones sponsoring those scholarships, paying for the Little League. And that's all stuff outside of just jobs and quality of life. That's just all the little things that make a small town a great place to live.
But you look at the default rates, right? With the SBA, what, 2%? So if I'm a community foundation that has the same rights and privileges that any other SBA guarantor has, why do I care? I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there has to be more to that. And maybe our good buddy Brian can figure that out, because to me, I think that that's back to the domino. All right. Chances are you will attract the buyers if the capital is available. Like, there's an incentive to do that, right? So not that there'll be a massive land grab, there might be, but regardless, it's giving those businesses options, right? If you want to get, let's just call it mezzanine debt. However you want to term it, these community foundations that come alongside the local community bank or the SBA capital provider, we're all in this together, and Spark Capital for that matter. So here's our capital plan. To me, that seems pretty unstoppable. Who wouldn't do that? Why wouldn't you do that? I'm bumping up on time. So I ask this of everybody. What's the one thing that you would tell a business owner that would either make their business more saleable or valuable?
I would say the number one thing is to really get ahead of it and get prepared and start talking to your accountant and really value your business and understand what the value of your business is, because you will have so many people tell you in the community maybe what your business is worth, but really it's up to you to understand that and to review your financials and understand what you would be comfortable with given your situation. And it's also important to think about who you're selling to. So I would say get ahead of the
value conversation.
Value conversation. Yep.
Right on. All right, Mr. Rust.
Yeah. I would encourage business owners to treat it like they're selling their house, which means, clean up the business, make sure the books are organized, easy to read. Also, don't forget about curb appeal. And that seems maybe not important, but when someone walks into your business, they're going to have a lot of perceptions. It's like the small little things like that. But if you treat it like your house, like you really want people to feel warm and comfortable about your business, you got to think about the details.
Rock on. Well, fellas, thanks for taking 1 minute extra over my time. Truly, I appreciate what you guys are doing. I am so prayerful that this catches fire and really builds the awareness because it is truly a need in the state, as well as I'm certain we're not the only state that is facing this problem. So, man, I applaud what you guys are doing, and I'm just so grateful for the time.
Hey, thank you, Ed. Us too. And we'd be remiss not to say, if you're a business owner or someone that could connect us, we're just a phone call or text away. So we'd love for you to reach out.
All your contact information will be in the show notes. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to the Defenders of Business Value. If today's episode helped you think differently about building or selling a business, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to become a more informed, confident owner, the one who knows how to grow, protect, and eventually exit at maximum value, subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to talk about your next deal, connect with me on LinkedIn. So until next time, we'll see you soon.